I'm Gavin Clark with the National Museum of Computing and with Reading Museum, and we're interviewing former employees and customers of Digital Equipment Corporation as part of the 60th anniversary of DEC opening its first office in the UK. It's May the 28th, and we are online. And I'm here today talking to Trudy Norris Gray. Trudy, please, let's start with the basics. If you could just give me your full name, your place, and your year of birth.
Trudy Norris Gray, born in Swansea, South Wales in the 1960s.
And where you were born in South Wales. Just tell us a little bit about your background. What did your parents do, and what was your early schooling?
I'm one of 8 children. I think that's relevant right through my professional career for sure. My parents were self-employed, always doing a lot of different things, multiple jobs just to get food on the table. But very happy childhood, no complaints. The one thing, if I were to complain or emphasize, is that it was back then, it was very much a male-dominated professional environment. So when I was looking for work, that was a bit of a challenge, but I'm sure we'll come to that later.
We will do. Okay. And what was your school? What was the kind of type of school you went to, and what did you study?
I went to Bishop Vaughan school. It was a comprehensive school, happened to be just across the road from where I lived. I was a bit of a pluralist in terms of studying many different subjects. So when I came to A levels, I did sciences and the arts, so French, maths, politics, British Constitution.
That's quite diverse because
Now,
people tend to go one way or another, don't they?
They do. And I had a bit of a blip on my A-level results. Didn't get the results I was expecting. I went up to what was then the Polytechnic of Wales in Pontypridd, where I signed on to an HND, a higher national diploma. And I moved from there to study a degree in business studies, which was one of those burgeoning subjects back then. People didn't really know what it was, but coming from a family who was self-employed, I got it, and I wanted to do that.
Okay. And did you have any kind of sense of what kind of job where you were heading, what kind of job you wanted to do?
No, I didn't. I had a very happy childhood, as I said, but I did know I wanted to earn some money. We were very short of money in our household. And I did want to be independent, and I wanted to be financially independent too. So I was open to offers. Now, I did constantly observe there were very few role models available to me back then, but I did observe that a member of the extended family was an accountant, and he seemed to earn more money than most around me. So I thought, well, I'll give that a go. And that's exactly what I did in the end when I left South Wales. I heard about a traineeship, a trainee accountantship in a company called Rakel. Rakel is where Vodafone emerged from. So I trained as an accountant then, and that really gave me a foot on the professional ladder, because a lot of people need accountants, certainly the ability to analyse, if not record, the books of accounts. But good platform, really good platform.
So just back step a little bit. I guess we didn't touch on this. Tell us a little bit. It's a large family you came from, wasn't it? And what was that like? And what was the upbringing like? Considering you're in Swansea area as well, growing up.
As I said, I was really happy in terms of a childhood. I was number 7, so you can imagine in terms of the pecking order, I was right down the bottom. 5 boys, 3 girls. There was a 20 age gap between the oldest and the youngest, so we had the full spectrum. What it taught me, I think I'd like to share, is the ability to get on with lots of different people, with lots of different agenda, and not always having natural airtime. So you have to be quite independent, but it taught you collaboration and an appreciation and respect for others. So I mentioned that of parents, they were always working, always grubbing to get a little bit extra for us all. But our mother was particularly intent on education. And while she didn't understand the full extent of what education could deliver for the family, she did know that she had to keep pushing us. And I was encouraged. I wasn't pushed. I wasn't forced, but I was encouraged to study. And even when I fell at the A-level hurdle, she kept pushing and said, "Come on, you can do that." And that was the last time I ever failed an exam, because that was one of life's lessons: is you can't be naturally lazy to some of these things. So, and my dad was always, working, but a strong character in terms of protection of his family. Those two, our parents, never had any peace or quiet. And I'm sure they did want it. But it was great. It was great.
So you come from this large family, and what was South Wales like at that time as well?
I guess I mean, when I left South Wales for the last time, as it were, in the early 1980s, we were in a recession. There were very few decent jobs going around, especially if you were a woman, and especially I'm a tall woman. You can't tell from there. So a little bit intimidating in a patriarchal society, and just a few years before that, we had the coal strikes, the coal miners' strikes, if you remember. Perhaps some of listeners will. I used to do homework by candlelight. So it was industrial. I think where I lived, it was industrial. There was a lot. If I looked one way out of the house, I could see the wonderful Brecon beacons in the distance. Always looked fantastic. But if I looked the other way, Swansea was known to be the most polluted landscape in Europe because of the remnants of the smelting industry that left its slag heaps there. It's beautiful now, but it was industrial. It was industrial, hard-working communities.
So,
As I keep saying, happy times.
so that's fascinating kind of like context there. So you landed. It's fair to say Racal was your first full-time job, correct? And you were an accountant for that was Racal, not Racal Vodafone.
Well, it became Racal Vodafone. So Racal Vodafone became a subsidiary of Racal. I went to work for the HQ of Racal, and it was a huge conglomerate. It had everything from avionics to modems to, at one point, DECA, the record company. And out of the communications division came this opportunity to go into mobile telephony from what they'd been used on the battlefield. And that became Racal Vodafone, which is now Vodafone. And I do remember being part of the HQ finance function, if you like. I remember helping to set up the books of accounts in Newbury for this company called Racal Vodafone. And I remember wonderful stories about entrepreneurs that led this conglomeration of companies. And I remember Sir Ernest Harrison. He was the head of the company. He loved racing, and he used to give out these huge bricks of a phone to people who used to meet on the race course, because those people, by and large, would want to keep in contact with base when they were away at the race course. But also they had the money. And the next day, the job, I remember one particular job I had was to ring up these telephones that had been given and ask, how are they enjoying the phone? But the real ruse was I needed to get an invoice address, because, our chair and CEO didn't, that wasn't the way that they operated. So that was very entrepreneurial, very go-getting. They saw the opportunity. It was a spin-out, these skunk works that I've seen so much of now in the tech world. Some work, some don't work. This one worked big time. And out of Racal, its HQ was in Bracknell. We all know that it went to Newbury in Berkshire. And then, its HQ now is in London, but an important industry for the UK, an important employer for the community. So learned a load in this, what could have been a really boring backroom function called finance. Um, I was I was lucky.
So you're at Racal, but then you kind of we're obviously here talking about DEC. How did the transition go from Racal straight Vodafone to DEC? How did that come about?
Well, my plan was always to go back down the M4 once I'd qualified. Um, Except when I did qualify, and it's a long process, as you probably know, to be a qualified accountant. A headhunter called me and was talking about a job at a company called Digital Equipment Company. I didn't know what that was, who that was, what industry. But when I had a little bit of, did a bit of homework, it really grabbed my attention. It looked exciting. And the pay was really good. And they didn't seem bothered that I was female with a provincial accent. And, you know, I got an interview. So I thought, well, why not? Let's go for the interview at least. And what was interesting about the whole interview process is they didn't ask me the questions I was expecting, which was about, you know, where did I go to school? What university did I go to? The interview probed with questions about my potential, my adaptability, my resourcefulness. What was I like in working in a team? You know, how determined and resilient was I? And they were constantly asking me questions about that. And that intrigued me because it was looking at me as a whole, not as somebody who has gone through a process. And the people I'd met in that process seemed nice. They seemed approachable. And again, that just gelled. So, long story short, I stayed in the Thames Valley. I joined Digital.
And you joined. What was the role you joined as?
I joined as a financial analyst. The job was to take the books of the accounts and interpret and better understand what was going on in the business. A really interesting way of understanding a whole business is to look at the books of the accounts, because they are the audit trail of what goes on. I'm not saying it's the be all and end all. There's lots more to running business, but it did allow me to ask questions and learn. And when you were, was employed by Digital, they called you their financial analyst partner. That would be the colloquialism, is that you were a partner with the business. They were keen to not have you on the side, but be integral to the way they interpreted, they operated, they executed, and then of course reviewed the business.
So you didn't know. Fair to say you didn't know much about DEC until you obviously did your research. At that point, you did go into your research, and the interview was surprising as well. Obviously, lots of interesting questions. Was it a kind of fairly formal interview? Was it in an office? Do you remember where it took place and who interviewed you?
Well, I remember getting this interview offer, and you know, back then there's no internet, right? So you have to go to the other pages and find out to be sure where you're going for the interview. And actually, DEC had so many offices in and around Reading. I wasn't sure whether it was in Kings Road. It was off the Basingstoke Road. I think there were offices in a place called Acre Road and Rosekiln Lane. There was a training facility in Highfield Park. And then there was these engineering, manufacturing, as well as HQ offices in what was known as DEC Park 1 and DEC Park 2. And I'm sure there are many more. So I remember turning up at DEC Park 1, which was on Imperial Way. And the interview, to answer your question, was in a windowless room on the upper mezzanine floor there. This DEC Park 1 was a converted warehouse, I think. And in order to get around planning, so that the folklore went, is that they took a warehouse which had planning permission and had this mezzanine set up that said it wasn't an office. So up I went, but in the process, I went past a shop in an office environment, a bank, a dry cleaners. There was even some pop-up shops in the huge restaurant at the front of DEC Park 1. And when I was in reception, I could smell, the dinner of the day, or was it the bacon and sausage butties? That smell wafted into the reception area. Now, I came from Rakel and have no facilities like that. In fact, it had very much a status-driven 3-tier canteen structure. So here it was sort of much more egalitarian. So anyway, to answer your question, it was in a windowless office, but past this, it was like an Aladdin's cave unfolding in front of me. And on the way in, I'd noticed all these fancy cars, Mercedes, BMWs, even Porsches. They were all fancy. And the car park was chock-a-block. Very difficult to get a parking space, as I remember. And it was even more difficult trying to get out because, again, the planning, the folklore goes, was that in order to ease the congestion, Reading Council wouldn't put in a slip road onto the M4. So it used to back up for hours, and I remember it backing up. But by that time, I'd had the interview. I was very excited. I had a very approachable boss. And it was, I wouldn't say it was an easy interview, but it felt easygoing. And you got the sense that there was going to be a job offer coming. It was not only insightful as a process, it was easy, but it was decisive. And indeed, just a couple of days later, I got the job offer.
Were you? I
Very
mean,
excited I was.
I was about to say, how did you feel about that? Excited, or how did you feel?
You're daunted, aren't you, at the prospect of, first of all, I have to resign. And then, am I doing the right thing? I was happy where I was, but I felt I could be happier and I could achieve more. And I was ready to take a risk, I suppose. So it mixed emotions, but definitely excited, to the point of being extra excited in terms of the prospect, and I still had a lot of career in front of me, as opposed to where I am now.
And so what was your first day? You've described, we'll come back to DEC Park in a second, but you go in on your first day. You've got a greater understanding of DEC now. What was your first day like at DEC?
Well, you were welcomed. You had a badge immediately. I can't remember the number. I got a vague recollection, but that was an important number, your employee badge number. And I had a really good welcome. My desk was ready. And my colleagues were all around. Now, what was also interesting was I had an onboarding training session lined up for that week. I can't remember what day it was, but it was that week. I didn't even know what onboarding was. And, it took me a long time to find somebody as leading edge as digital who did onboarding. It must have been a couple of decades later before I found another company who did it.
What did that mean then? What did onboarding mean? What does it mean? What was the process you went through?
So it really was an opportunity for the company to tell you what to expect and to take any questions. So it was everything from, give us your details so that we can pay you. These are the systems that are really important to the organization. This is the organization chart. These are the products we sell, not in any detail, but it gives you an idea of where they fit in. A few customer case studies, as I recall. Digital was partner-oriented, so there was some case studies on key important partners to the business. And what was interesting is this wasn't run by HR. I'm sure it was organized by HR. But actually, the business people came in to tell you about the sales organization or the partner organization or the product. And it was like by osmosis that you were getting you were imbibing the culture of the company, which was very, very inclusive. And the onboarding session had everybody in it. It wasn't hierarchical. So many people I met on that onboarding day, were very helpful when I needed to get things done later on in my time in DEC, because I knew they were in certain parts of the organisation. I would reach out and ask for help. So it was inclusive. It was helpful. It took away any fear that you had because you didn't know. And you had the opportunity to ask questions. And of course, when people ask questions, the person next to you asks a question you hadn't even thought of. But the answer is really valuable.
And you
So
said
it was fab.
so this was different. So already this is a company that's different to sort of Rayco itself, isn't it? These are kind of not usual standard management practices or workplace culture that you're experiencing.
That's correct. And I'd had an internship in BP in Harlow while I was doing my degree. I didn't have it there either. Now, I would put BP as one of the top performing employee companies, and certainly back then. And I don't even remember it there. And that was an investor in people. So these were taken. I was later to assume that digital involved themselves a lot in new management theories, and as a result, they executed on it. So it wasn't just an interesting sortie into academia. They actually brought it back and applied it.
Do you think did this come from the States? Did this come from UK management? Or how far did UK management kind of start influencing that?
Well, I would say the UK leadership definitely walked the talk. Now, my belief is most of these programs would have stemmed from the US, from Boston, Maynard in Boston. However, what I would say is Boston knew that they didn't have the rights to all good ideas. So they would take people from the UK on secondments, 1, 2, 3 years longer, and they would take what's going on in the field and learn from it, and then it would come back at you. So it was a mix, but largely programs were developed from the mothership, and then they would come back out.
So you've had your first day, your first onboarding, and then what was the environment? So let's talk a little bit about the workplace setting. We'll come back to management culture. It's been a little while, but the environment, because you're in Deck Park 1, it's an open plan. You described the kind of the shops, and it sounded like the street, I think. It's open plan, isn't it? That's another kind of sort of feather in the cap of new management practices.
Oh, it's good reminder. Yes, it was called the street. You're absolutely right, Gavin. It was huge. It was cavernous. If you were in area 1, so it would be G1 or floor 1, it would be a long walk to the end to Deck Park 2, where engineering was. So you would always have to take time, but in the process, you would always bump into people, and that was always enjoyable. I mentioned the windowless offices. I guess that wasn't so good. So if you wanted some privacy, you would pop into your manager's office, but it was windowless. The open plan, you would often hear people giggling, chatting, convening to get something done. So it wasn't loud, but there was a hubbub, a purposeful hubbub about the place. And then, I was always an early starter. The restaurant was always open. And you would queue to get your sausage or bacon sarnie. And that was a real delight. Some people would stay in the restaurant and catch up with others there, and other people would take it to the desk. It was sociable as well as purposeful. And, the restaurant was a big restaurant. It was at the other end of the building. It was a great way of catching up with other people you wouldn't normally meet because it was so big, just so big.
Did you run into management? Did you run into Jeff Shingles or on this kind of walking around like this?
All the time. They were, and people know the adage, managed by walking about. Yes, the leadership team would be seen, and they would engage. As a junior, you might be a little bit scared to say anything, but you would smile. And Jeff or Alistair or John Coffey or John Barrett, all these guys were approachable, but they were busy. It wasn't playtime. We had things to do.
How do you think that kind of, I suppose, what were the benefits of that? How did that help in any way? Being either being able to approach these guys like this, or did it help sort of the culture in some way, or did it help advance the business, the exchange of ideas in any way, do you think?
Yes, and yes. They were always looking out for new ideas. So if you had an idea, you wouldn't necessarily pounce on them as they were walking past, but you would go through your boss, and if your boss thought it was a good idea, there wouldn't be a problem with positioning it. There were fora to do that as well, different management gatherings, but they were always looking out for new ideas. They loved initiative. And what I came to know and understand is they were looking out for talent constantly. Is if we could grow the talent was, I would say, part of the culture, we could grow the business. So they were always interested. Now, it could be if you had an idea, you have to get the point across, what were the benefits, what were the downsides, and it would be discussed, and it would be a yes or a no. But more often than not, you'd done your homework because you were taught or socialized to make sure that you'd done all, your stakeholder engagement. You'd collaborated to come up with a better idea. And they were incredibly talented bosses in terms of getting the most out of their teams for the benefit of the business.
Do you have any kind of
the other thing I would think? Sorry, I should really emphasize that it was always about the customer. So if you centered whatever you had to say around the customer, absolutely, you automatically had their attention. And let me give you an example of what I mean. So I was supporting or part of the sales function for a lot of the time. Interestingly, when I started, and for the bulk of my time at Digital, the salespeople didn't have a revenue-based bonus scheme. Now, that was fascinating, in contrast to some of the competition, which was absolutely sales-driven. It was much more, your performance was much more measured about customer satisfaction and customer engagement. So even down to your focus, that was evidenced by some of these programs like that. So they would always put the customer first. What can we do to make the customer more successful? How could we make the customers go faster? And this idea of mutuality was pervasive. Is grow the customer, you'll grow the business.
How did they, if I've heard this before, there was no bonus up till some point in I can't remember what it was, the late 1980s. How was it possible to measure things like customer satisfaction and customer engagement in a way that I suppose today we're obsessed by things like big data and measurables, aren't we? How would they go about, I suppose, measuring the level of customer satisfaction or engagement that you or any other employee might have been successful in eliciting?
I remember come review time in this regard, the job of the sales managers, the account managers, was to go to the customer and get a signed letter back. It was in a pro forma that said they had this level of engagement, whatever that was, and any comments that would go with it. So it came from the customer.
So there'd be some kind of letter from the customer to say that they were happy in some kind of way, or they'd received great service.
Yes, they'd engaged so many meetings. They felt that they were being properly supported by digital. They were happy with these things, areas for improvement, that kind of thing. Yeah.
That's kind of a remarkable
I know
turnaround,
it
isn't
sounds,
it? In terms of the metrics that are applied to the staff, going out to the customer to seek this kind of validation, I think.
it is great. And of course, what it meant, of course, is the account manager needed to have a good relationship with his account. And at the time, back then, of course, there were expenses. So a good lunch often eased the oiled the wheels. But customers are savvy. You can't overly manage customers in that way. If they've got a message to put across, they would. So yes, a good lunch might have eased it, but by and large, it was great. It was substantive feedback, as opposed to metric numbers driven.
It's interesting considering the times we're in. So that's interesting. So tell me a little bit, just briefly, impressions of Jeff Shingle's name. His name comes up quite a lot for obvious reasons. Did you form an impression of what Jeff was like on the times you might have met him, either in meetings or your journeys across what we call the campus?
Yes, he was important. He was the big wig. My impression was that he was approachable. We used to have, for example, sales kickoff meetings or the meetings where he would present. You know when somebody's approachable. And he was a very intuitive and perceptive individual, as well as being a great leader. So he was able to join dots ahead of other people joining dots. And that would impress the audience. But, the other thing was that we used to have a secretarial structure. So most of the managers, leaders would have their private secretary. They were very protective of their bosses. So in some respects, the secretaries, you would be in awe of the secretaries because you had to get through there if you wanted a one-on-one meeting. But similarly, the secretaries had their eyes and ears open for opportunities. So they had ready access to, in this instance, Jeff, and would love to put good ideas, but they would screen it too. But to answer you specifically, is in every interaction, whether it's passing in the street, whether it was being part of the audience or being part of a specific meeting, he was always engaging. He was never dogmatic. He was never rude. No, certainly when I was around, he was a great leader.
So let's talk about a little bit about the culture of DEC, the workplace culture. We kind of keep coming across this concept of doing the right thing, which we've kind of alluded to, and the DEC way. One of the things that keeps coming up again and again is the kind of the proud history of advancing employees, management advancing employees, either through their own initiative or through structured programs and training. I suppose, did you ever feel, did you witness that, or how did that kind of come to, did you witness it, or did you kind of feel that being applied to you in any kind of way?
Oh, big time. I had a huge investment in me as an individual. They, right from that onboarding session, if you like, that was the beginning. And apart from the leadership team, as you said, who led by example and emphasized and encouraged us to do the right thing. And I remember a few programs that I particularly benefited from. The first one I would say is this, what I think was called the Senior Leadership Program. It was a 3-week, 3 separate weeks, off-site for 20 selected individuals from right across the organization, the UK organization. And the job was, first of all, the first week was all about better understanding me, how I operated. The next week was how others operate and how I interact with that and how I could do better. And the third week is how do you deploy all that to the benefit of the business? Wow. I mean, this was a program where I came away and I remember coming home to my husband and saying, I'd just come of age. I felt like I turned 18 again because I it was investment in me in order, obviously, to enable the business to perform better. Wow. I see people introducing these, not in the same robust way, by the way, nowadays. And I just think this was 3 decades ago. It's a long time. Another one that I partook in and I remember well was a European executive education program at INSEAD in Fontainebleau in France. And that was around new management and business theories. And it was there, again, it was select people. It was really about leadership. How do you engage and get the most out of other people? What were the tools that were available to you? How to deploy them? And also, there was always a project is, let's team together, usually about 5 or 6 people, take a project. Usually it would be something that we would thought of ourselves, get an exec team sponsor, and come up with an idea or initiative, a program that would actually better the business. Other things in terms of investment, I do remember talks. We had great speakers come to DEC Park. I remember Tony Buzan, the mind mapper, inventor. I still use that now. I remember Charles Handy, the Shamrock organization, the empty raincoat, really how industry was going to change. And of course, especially Charles Handy was ahead of his time in terms of outsourcing a lot of activities. So it had these great speakers. I mean, this is real investment. I remember time management courses. I remember interview and recruitment courses, how to better recruit, presentation courses. There were so many. Those are the ones I can remember off the top of my head, and certainly I partook and benefited from. But wow, no, it's not just the investment in the money behind this. It's the investment in time of the individual who attended, but also the managers who followed up afterward to make sure that the learning was getting understood, debated, if you like, but assimilated and deployed. Just fabulous.
And how were they kind of, I suppose, advancing you through organisation? Because it's worth noting here, you obviously joined this financial analysis role, but you ended, unless my notes are wrong, and correct me if I am. I've got here you headed Channel's finance group and then moved into frontline sales, and then you became a UK board manager, I believe, as general manager of components and peripherals. So how did that happen? Were you coached through that? Were you picked up that job opens up, I want to go that, or they were more kind of like pushing you along in these directions? How did that all happen?
It was definitely the latter. I don't know whether I should be embarrassed to say that, Gavin, but they probably saw more potential in me than I did. And that may be because of my background. And it probably is because of my background, much more subdued societally. So if I think about another great leader, Ian Smith, if that name comes up, I was in the finance function and I was his partner in Channels, as you said. And I remember him saying to me, "Come on, Trudy, you're great with customers. Come over to the dark side. I know you think it's the dark side. It's not really. Come over to the front end of the business," which I did. But it required him to, and again, I wonder if I should be embarrassed about this, but it required him to say, "Come on, let's do this. By the way, I'd like you to." There was benefit for him as well. So he spotted me, he identified a role for me, and then he coached me. And so I worked with Ian as he grew as well. And I learned so much about customers, from the front end, and of course the products. And also around partnering. How do you get mutuality working, spinning like a top to the benefit of the customer? And then this is a smiling moment. I remember the new CEO who replaced Jeff Shingles was looking for an executive assistant. And that was a role that was always, you're always going to go on to great things from that. I actually loved working for Ian. And this new guy, I didn't know him. And he wanted, Chris wanted me. And I said to Ian, I don't want to go. Thanks, but no thanks. And he took me to one side and he said, Trudy, you've got to do it. This is a real opportunity. So, I mean, how impressive is that? And I took the role, and indeed, I ended up from that position. I went to be a board member for the UK organisation, and I run the whole of components and peripherals, it wasn't one of the big businesses, but my gosh, was it profitable and it was sizable.
I think you were the first woman board member, is that correct?
I believe so. I was trying to think about this. Was I? I don't remember anybody else. But even finance or HR, which often have, or marketing, which often have female. I don't remember any. So yes, these were leaders who had your best interest at heart and would coach you, equip you, sponsor you, even when you didn't know you wanted it yourself.
So tell me, just step back a little bit, because we've come a long way in your career progression. But near the beginning, you touched on this as well. The cars out in front. You kind of described yourself offline as kind of sort of you were of the time a social mobility, the yuppie of the time. You got the car and everything, didn't you? Which is quite a surprise for your, I suppose, for your upbringing, where you come from. If you could just describe that a little bit about the red Merc and you kind of how you were kind of progressing. You're sort of supposed socially.
It was. I remember I was eligible for a company car, and you used to get these huge dot matrix printouts of what cars were available, and it would be on the side it would have a financial value, whether it was in your band or not. And I remember there was a basic red Mercedes that was in my price. So my first company car was a red Mercedes. And, I remember driving home to see my dad. And my dad, I caught my dad when I was getting up the next morning, looking around his car like somebody had stolen it. And because this is not what we were used to in South Wales, especially somebody of my age. And my gender. Of course, my dad was proud, but that was a big deal. It was at the time. There was a lot of conspicuous consumption at the time, so it was an evidence that you were doing well. So I came from, as I said, a lovely family, but zero money. I never had allowance or pocket money ever. So it was all about me earning money. And here I was in my 20s, coming back with a Mercedes. So life was definitely, especially in the tech world. But as we got to the end of the 80s, life got a bit better for a lot of people. And if I think about the Reading area or the Thames Valley area, there were a lot of yuppies, young upwardly mobile individuals. And there was an acronym for no kids yet or something, dinkies. And there we were. So I had disposable cash. I had evidence that I was doing well. And in reality, I was growing as an individual, which, as I look back, was much more important to me in the career that I subsequently had following DEC. So, yes, I remember being able to buy a home when I was 25, because I was younger. But really, that's so different to where we are now. And the house prices, sadly, used to go up so fast then that you better move quickly to make the most of your equity and the mortgage capability that you had. So, yeah, I definitely was one of those yuppies, and I never knew what one was. I never expected to be one of those. And when I went in search of money, which I did following Wales, and here it was coming back at me. The more you did a good job, the more the money followed you rather than you chasing it. And that was very much DEC's way, is you got rewarded. You didn't get obscenely rewarded by any means, but the tech industry is and was a good player in the UK. It's better in the UK, I would say, than the US, relatively.
So tell me, that's fascinating. So what was Reading like? You mentioned the social mobility, and it was the 1980s, and we remember this phrase "yuppies." What we've talked about headquarters, Deck Park. What do you remember of being in and around Reading at that time? What was the town of Reading like at this time? And do you have anywhere? Did you have anywhere pubs and bars that you would go out with the colleagues or other people?
So if I think about Reading Town Centre, there was no Oracle Mall then. So it was a bit bitty. I would say, you'd walk down, and I forgot what the street is where John Lewis is. And that was it. So I would definitely go to the cinema there, but it was a bit ropey. I can't even remember what the cinema's name was. But if I think about the bars or pubs in and around DEC, that's where I would frequent, if anywhere, socially. And I remember right opposite on Imperial Way was the Post House. It had a captive audience and a bar that was constantly full because of DEC, either because I had account managers taking customers there, or you had the employees there. But you didn't have to go far across the motorway, but you did have to manage that awful exit from the car park in DEC, to pubs in Swallowfield, in Heckfield particularly, was a particular jaunt, I would say, of many people. It was a 10-minute away journey in the car, 5 minutes perhaps, but it was far enough away to decompress, which is where people used to go, either for a lunch, a liquid lunch, or more likely for convening after work. I went there a few times. Back in the day, it was largely male people who turned up there. The pub, I can't even know what the pub's name, its real name was, but it was known as the Two Towns because the men who went there they were referring to the landlady who used to pull pints there. So these pubs undoubtedly did very good business from DEC. And not only did people go there regularly, but they would stay a long time. So it was a regular annuity business of volume, as they say now. I remember when the board, Jeff Shingles, etc., moved to Shire Hall. I don't remember a pub being around there, easy access. So if you did go to the pub, you rarely saw the board because they were in a different location.
What was the, I suppose, what was Reading like? Was it kind of well-heeled town at the time? We see a lot of MD shops and storefronts there now, and it's got a different feel. Was there a sense of affluence around Reading at that time?
I don't remember it being so. If people lived in and around DEC, it wouldn't be in Reading town centre. It would be in some of the nicer villages, the thatch roof villages in Berkshire and in on the borders of Hampshire. Wokingham, a nice housing there, better heeled, definitely better heeled than Reading. So people would go in that direction. If you wanted services, people would travel to, but not necessarily live in Bracknell. There was an ice rink. There were facilities there. So I don't remember Reading being well heeled. It was, if I think about where Deck Park was, you had to go down the Basingstoke Road and then try and navigate to get a parking place somewhere. Initially there were one or two nice shops. I remember Holmes, for example, was a fine furnishing shop. Even that closed down, despite the area being able to afford it. and in around Basingstoke Road wasn't well heeled at all.
I think I think it still has challenges like that. And did you say you bought your house this on your kind of you're up and coming? You bought a house in the Reading area. This first property you bought?
Yes, it was in Bracknell, but I quickly moved then to Finchampstead. I moved a couple of times there, and I stayed there. 20 minutes from the office, easy access, nice rural location.
And what was the sort of social like? I'd be technical pubs, but there are other activities to do in and around the Reading or the Berkshire area that people either you would do or DEC employees might do as team activities.
I can't remember many people. They would go to the pub, but then it would be back to family life. I don't remember a lot of socializing outside of that. No, I don't.
Okay. Well, let's just switch gears because we talked about the corporate values of DEC, and you alluded to this earlier about being a woman in the technology sector. You obviously came from Racal, Vodafone. What was it like being a woman in the technology sector today? It has structural issues of recruiting women, but it seems to be more female representation than there was in the 80s. What was it like then? I suppose particularly in a finance field in the technology sector for you, and what was Reading's track record like? I suppose at hiring, retaining women, and and giving them a place through sort of supported programs.
I guess let me just sort of do a day in the life of, is that there would be many meetings where I would be the only female. There would be many meetings where it would be hard to get your voice heard and you'd have to really, work on that. But let me just stop a minute. I remember there was a different manager, and in order to ingratiate myself, there was always coffee or tea available in a boardroom or an important meeting. And I was getting everybody coffee, and he just sidled up to me and said, "Don't ever do that again. You're reiterating what they might think is your social value." And then afterwards, after this meeting, I remember going up and saying, "Thank you, I really appreciate that." And he said to me, "And by the way, we should use your height. It gets attention because you are tall. And don't be afraid to use the attributes to get," because he told me I was soft-spoken, but to get your message across. So you did get coaching like that. Now, when I was in the finance function, interestingly, it was much more male-dominated than it was in the sales function. And that was a surprise. And I felt that there was definitely a boys' club there. So you had to. But I come back to these people like Ian Smith, who really challenged and just encouraged me to reach my potential. I'll give you one instance. I remember he had somebody in his office and I was waiting outside. So I sat at his secretary's desk because I needed to speak to him and I wanted to be the next person there. So I was just sitting there. And the chap who was meeting with Ian came out and said, "Hey, darling, can you get me a cup of coffee, please?" And I can't remember what the put down was, but it would have been knowing from me. And Ian came out and heard it and said, "I wish I could have sold tickets for that. He'll never do that to anybody ever again." But that was the kind of environment. There was an expectation that this was largely male, and when you did get the opportunity, you got some really good people. But let me just give you another example. When I had my first child, and I had all my family when I was at DEC, the maternity leave was 2 weeks full pay. 2 weeks. And then I could take 6 weeks off in total. That's total, including before. I could take 6 weeks off, but it would be at reduced pay for the second 4 weeks. And digital was better than most by giving this addition. So you can imagine for a lot of women or a lot of families, if you have a family, the ability to manage to that kind of time scale is hard, physically, let alone emotionally. And then, I was lucky to be able to afford a nanny. I was able to go back to work financially as well. But that wasn't true for so many. And certainly there was no paternity leave. So we lost a lot of women in that, as they set out on their family journeys. And that's a big shame. So, and to your point, there is still attrition in terms of retention in the tech world. But that was one of the main reasons, I would say, is family life.
Do you think it was any better or worse than other employers? The maternity, I mean, you mentioned the maternity, I think, was better than others, even though it's terrible by today's standards. Do you think they had a concept of like DEI programs, or they were trying to work to make things more acceptable at maybe a structural level rather than just be on an individual manager level?
They did. I remember conversations about having a creche, for example. I didn't partake of it, so I don't know where it went. But that was leading edge. We're talking 3 decades ago. And it would be expensive because they wanted to make it affordable for all female employees. So the company would need to fund the difference. So that was innovative. It used to have, I remember there was a conversation about having shopping delivered, which would be another thing. Again, we get shopping delivered now, but, instantaneously with Deliveroo or whatever. But it wasn't the case there. So it did try. Was it better than its competitors? I do believe it was. However, there's a big however, it's all relative because, the difference between 2 weeks and 6 weeks partially paid is nominal, really. It's at the margins. But do I expect if digital would still be around, it would have tried to, with the original leadership under Cam Nelson? I definitely think so.
What do you make of this concept? We hear a lot of this culture of do the right thing. You've kind of alluded to it a couple of times, and it seems to be applied to employees and to customers as well. Was that something you were aware? It sounds like that's something you were very much aware of, and could it? And I think you said this turned DEC into a trusted brand. I mean, is that kind of a fair sort of summary of how that worked?
Yeah, people trusted, customers definitely, and partners definitely trusted digital. That was for sure. I think, what you make by that question, what you make me think of is today's post office scandal. Is you weren't boxed in just to our job. You were encouraged to put your head above the parapet. If things didn't smell right, you asked a question. And if it just felt wrong, you would escalate it. And that would be okay. Just because you were being measured on it or paid for it on it, it didn't keep you in a box. It was, you knew when things were wrong. And you usually knew when things were wrong. And you were encouraged to speak up. And it would be addressed. Or if you didn't have the full picture, you would be availed of that. But it was okay to ask the question and put your head above the parapet.
Was there any tension with customers? Because it's one thing to do the right thing for the customer, but it doesn't necessarily always serve the interests of your company and vice versa, does it? Was there ever a tension of do the right thing in the sales perspective?
Well, let me give you some in the service department. Making sure that customers had up the uptime that they needed. People would work all hours to make sure that a customer got back online. Let's do it that way. And then if I think about some of the deliveries of kit to banks, in a high street. And they let's assume that a bank was expecting delivery on a Saturday, or let's do Sunday. you'd close the street because you'd need a crane to get the big computer in the branch office. If there was a delay to that computer being delivered, that was a big problem. So we would work around to see, well, could we take it off somewhere else in order to meet this? So, yes, there were challenges like delivery of kit, or there was something called the denied parties list where you couldn't sell to certain organizations or industries. And, people were there to address and solve problems. And of course, what happens with that is that you deliver the kit into the bank in this instance. Of course, you've got a very grateful customer. I don't know whether I'm answering that question.
No, you are. Sorry, Trudy. Yeah, you are. I think it gives me a good understanding. And do you I'm just kind of curious about the sales, the dynamic. It seems like the customer did come first, and there wasn't, at least under Ken Olsen's era, there wasn't this kind of like, the customer took a second place to the business. It was a mutually beneficial relationship, it seems like.
Yes. Yeah, definitely. And, when I think it was a partner business model, and the partner would be part of that. So, working in collaboration was natural, even if it was external to the organization through the partner. And sometimes these partners had financial metrics, and they were operating in boxes. But even then, another instance, I remember, I won't give the partner's name, but I remember they were really pushing to get something over the line for year end. And it just wasn't the right thing to do. And I remember saying, come on, John, you know the rules. And it was with a smile, and I get it, John, you got bonuses to make, but we're not going to do it. And John would just fold in front of you because he knew that was the way we operated. He gave it a go. It didn't get anywhere.
Well, all good things have to come to an end. You obviously you left DEC at some point, and you went to, I think you went to move to Sun Microsystems. What kind of made you move on from DEC?
I didn't really want to. I mean, there was a change in leadership, and there was a downturn in the business, and there was a reduction in force, a redundancy program, and my department was part of that. So it forced the issue, if you like. It was probably time after 10 years, 10 really good years, and what I found is, I was out of work for no time, 0 days, because my credentials from DEC, they stood on their own. And as you said, ultimately, I became the first female leader of a major tech company in the UK. And I never even thought about it when I took that job, about being a female leader. I just was the new leader until somebody told me. I have no doubt, absolutely no doubt, Gavin, that without the investment in me and people pulling me out and getting me to smell the coffee, helped me get achieve the career potential that I did. So I'm really, really, I think the word is grateful. I'm forever grateful for my time at DEC and the people I worked with.
Where were you at the end? Obviously, you were restructured. You're restructured out of the position, and you ended up at Sun, which was a great company. I used to cover Sun back in the day. Where were you when you heard that DEC had kind of, I suppose, been acquired by Compaq and then HP? And how did you feel about that?
I guess I was saddened. This was a great brand, DEC, in my view, trusted brand. I guess I was pleased in some respect that it did survive in a form, and certainly some of its products survived, because that's what they were purchasing, was the people and the IP and the trademarks. So I was glad in that respect. I mean, I can be a bit cheeky and say, well, I'm glad, I've got a good pension coming from DEC now. And that was, thanks to DEC, and it's now managed by HP. But that would be trite. I was disappointed. And of course, it reminded me of the importance of strategy. Is despite all these wonderful things about digital, digital did take the decision initially not to go into the PC business. And that was such a consequential decision. And then it took a decision to allow Ken to step down, and that has a ripple effect as well. The old guard steps down, as it were. A new day has dawned, and that has an impact. Different measures, different motivators, different levels of love for the company. And I can genuinely say people loved working at DEC. I know I did. I absolutely loved working.
Did you? You were there, I think, when it was still when Ken had left. I think when you were still in that transition era. Did you notice things changing in the UK? How were they changing?
It was ruthless. Now, I'm not arguing that perhaps from a financial point of view, it did need to be ruthless. But I do remember people being laid off by email. And, this human part that was digital was so known for, the humanity and also a humility that DEC had. There was a time is that nobody would ever be made forcibly redundant. It was seen as a management issue. If you had put somebody in the wrong job, or you got a department that was your job was to reassign them. So to get axed after, many people had already been there 20 years by email. And, I remember being in a meeting, and you had to come up with a list of people who go, and they were big lists. And one of the new leaders said, he needs to go. He's got a beard. And I don't know whether it was an attempt at lightening the situation. It just didn't. It was almost heartless after a company that had been full of heart.
It's certainly not the DEC way, is it? I mean, the culture people are familiar with.
No. So the sad thing then is that when people see a bit of that, it creates a floodgate, or it opens a floodgate. People say, time to go. So whilst there were forced redundants, there were people who voluntarily left, and that was a shame.
So let's reflect a little bit about, I suppose, the legacy. DEC is obviously gone. It does have it has a history. This technology isn't visible to us today. Think about the legacy on you and on the wider world. Take the latter question first. What do you think DEC's legacy is, I suppose, in the wider world, on the technology of today, if anything at all? If it hasn't got one, that's fine. People do say that. Do you think it has a technology legacy that we can still point to or feel or see in some way?
Absolutely. I think, if I think about some of the companies like Oracle or Microsoft, it took some of the technology and built on it. If I think about, you said that some of its products are no longer in use. I would doubt that, Gavin. I would think there are, especially, the VAX era. The last thing I sold was a PDP-11. It had first been introduced in 1972, and people were still buying it in the late 90s. It had that, ability to be trusted and reliable. So, but nonetheless, to your question, so many people went on to new organizations. Microsoft was just building at the time I left. Digital, it was just building in the UK, and a lot of people went there. I mean, not just from the sales, but from the engineering, product leadership point of view. So I think it's had a huge impact. I think we're relearning some of the ways to operate around doing the right thing. I think people they will get it. The training, gosh, we could relearn that one. And some people are. So in terms of the wider world, it's enormous. Even one of its products, Alta Vista, it was the first search engine. It was the first search engine. Other things are built off that. I mentioned the printing, dot matrix printer. I was in an airport a couple of months ago, and they were still using one of Digital's dot matrix printers. So, around the world, you will see DEC equipment less and less and less, and it's rare, of course, but it's evidence in new companies.
What do you think its legacy is on you? And let me just phrase that, because obviously you had the successful career at Sun Microsystems, Oracle, and Microsoft. You're ex-chair of WISE campaign. You're current chair of UCAS, UCAS, and Institute of Engineering and Technology. And you now live in Seattle. You've come a long ways from Swansea, haven't you? So there's obviously, it's had an influence on you as well. How could you, I suppose, translate that or describe that?
I think it's massive. It developed me, it encouraged me, championed me, it sponsored me. It gave me role models that I still use today. It gives me guts. It gave me resilience to keep on delivering. And I have never, ever once, not one day, do I forget about the customer. And that's all down to DEC. And I would say the importance of collaboration and partnering. If I think about companies like Microsoft, it's a partner-led business. The furrow was tread before Microsoft. It was learned by DEC. And if I think about some of the things that Digital did for the community and ultimately for the country, I think those are being. I just think they had a matching scheme. You've probably heard about this. Is that way back then, they would match your charitable contributions pound for pound. It wasn't 50%, it wasn't 20%, it was pound for pound back then. And, I remember giving a cheque to Macmillan for £3,000 because they'd helped my father. And Digital said, this is part of our community in that case. So here's a cheque. And, the ballet they sponsored, if I think about them sponsoring the Tate, they were altruistic. Of course they were in business, and its leadership was under Ken was par excellence. We've got something to really learn from that kind of individual.
Do you think these are kind of things you kind of feel through your work? I mean, you kind of do lots of UCAS and WISE and ET are kind of very much community organizations with missions, aren't they? I mean, you're trying to raise generations
Yes.
and change things. How has this kind of influenced your work or shape, or has it led you to these organizations and try and feed that DEC culture, I guess, made those lessons out into the world of today?
Well, first of all, it's about giving back. If I think about those roles that you've mentioned, they're all charitable roles, which I'm delighted to do, but it's the right thing to do, is to take whatever experience you might have and help others. The other thing that I haven't talked about is that what Digital taught me was about unmet needs. It's okay to deliver for the customer today, but you got to start thinking about what you're going to do for them tomorrow to make them successful. So the constant quest for innovation, I mentioned Alta Vista, for example, that was a skunk works. It's okay to do skunk works. It's okay to fail at them, but you will get some success out of that will help you blossom and thrive and survive. So, if I think about, one of the sad that is seeing Digital fail ultimately, despite all these fabulous ingredients, that was about strategy. That was about the importance of making sure you get the right strategy and not be dogmatic about it. So, yes, I feed it in all the time. And of course, the other thing I know from Digital is that you're always unfinished, is that your job is to be a lifelong learner and continuously learn. And I do that with the organizations that I still engage with. But that is a philosophy that came from DEC.
That's great. Trudy, I think that covers everything.
Well, thank you, Gavin. I do want to say thank you for doing this. I'd never even thought that it would be a subject matter, but, as I prepared and tried to get my memory back in gear, I just, I love this. I love going to work. I mean, how many people could say that? There was a little bit of stress, but it was at the margin. It was trying to get something. It's probably the last company where I loved going to work to that extent. So thank you for reminding me of all that. And perhaps in some small way, we'll pass on these small messages.